Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Chai Mitzvah, the sponsor of Scholar Circle, is a Jewish engagement program that partners with over 700 organizations and has worked with over 9,000 individuals in small group learning, social action, and spiritual and ritual development. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversations for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. To learn more, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholar Circle lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after this lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. Our featured scholar tonight is Scott Shay. Scott is Chai Mitzvah's board president, a businessman, thought leader, and author of 3 books. Scott's most recent book, Conspiracy U, a Case Study, challenges the proliferation of anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist conspiracy theories championed on college campuses from the far right and the far left. Scott has served on the boards of local, national, and international Jewish organizations. Scott has been very active on college campuses and high schools, educating students and alumni about the impact of anti-Zionist conspiracy theories. To learn more about his work and books, please visit his website at scottshay.com. Before I welcome our scholar, a couple of housekeeping items. To submit questions, please use the Q&A button on your screen. Q&A will be held at about 40 minutes into the lecture, but you can submit questions anytime throughout. The lecture recording will be sent to your email in a few days and will also be available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Now to Scott Shay.
Hi, welcome everyone. And before I begin, I just want to say that the good news is you're not in the room with me, and that we're doing this by webinar because I have a sinus infection. So if my voice sort of trails off or I need to cough, just please excuse me. But I am glad, I'm actually very glad that we're having this particular seminar in late July, because in less than a month, students are going to start trickling back onto campus, and we're likely to have another period of disharmony is probably too light a word, but a real disquieting period of disruption and of interference in what's should be a scholarly academic environment. And we're also likely to see at the upcoming Democratic National Convention in Chicago, pretty substantial protests, which will also ignite further protests on campus. So it's important now to start talking about the fall, or the late summer and fall. And it's important now to start getting organized to some degree. It's very interesting that when I wrote Conspiracy U at first, which was mostly written in 2020, and it was published in 2021, and I described what was going on, particularly among faculty members in terms of out-and-out anti-Semitism, and how conspiracy theories about Jews were being peddled as academic theories. And at the time, frankly, people weren't paying attention to it. A lot of people who thought I was exaggerating on campus, and particularly among some board trustees, people said it's not so bad. Students are just sort of acting out a little bit from time to time. Don't pay attention to any of these BDS resolutions. People are just venting steam. And in reality, it's as depicted in Conspiracy U, and it's much worse. It's much worse because it is become systemic, but more than systemic, it's become part of the fabric of many universities and many academic departments. I'm going to get into our topic, but I just, it pains me to say what I'm about to say, which is that there are many humanities and social science departments in the United States where you would not be accepted as a graduate student if you show any allegiance toward Israel, even pretty liberal to extremely liberal, progressive advocacy for Israel, or in some cases, even having visited Israel. I know of members of medical school admissions committees who advise Jewish students at this point not to emphasize their Jewish side, and particularly not to emphasize there is any connection with Israel whatsoever, and not to participate in programs during their summers as undergrads in order to make their, in order not to have their medical school application looked askance upon. I know faculty members who were up for tenure, who sadly did not get tenured because they did projects or had some affiliation with Israel. We are at the equivalent of a 5-alarm fire here in the United States in academia. And as I argue in Conspiracy U, I think the fundamental work is at the faculty level, even more than any other level, and at the administration level, and at the Board of Trustees level. So many people were taken aback by what happened on campus on October 8th, where on October 7th was a very distressing day for, I think, probably, I'm gonna assume everyone in this webinar. Since the Holocaust, there's not been a time when so many Jews were killed in one day and taken hostage, removed from their bed, and in the most vicious, despicable, and atrocious way. But what happened on October 8th is even more disturbing, because immediately campus groups celebrated in an almost ecstatic manner the killing of Jews. And it was under the thin veneer of anti-Zionism, but for many it was really very much anti-Jewish explicitly. And for others, they kept that veneer, which is a very useful veneer. And immediately, and with the greatest of irony, they could say the most atrocious things like kill the Jews, and do it under what they would argue was free speech rights. River to the sea, which essentially means the ethnic cleansing of all of the space between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, which many students couldn't even point you to the globe as to where it was, became totally acceptable. Ethnic cleansing, if it's for anybody else, really, really bad. Although it doesn't necessarily move them to do anything. Ethnic cleansing of Jews, to be extolled. So October 8th was very disquieting, and this was all done under the banner of free speech. So one of the things that's very important is to be able to call this out and to be able to react to the free speech, the free speech defense. And clearly, and Simon can show this photo, the 4 Ivy League professors, 3 in particular, who testified before Congress, really use the free speech as being okay, even if it was, let's go down to the Quad and kill the Jews. That part would be okay, as long as, and protected potentially under Harvard, Penn, and MIT's free speech codes. In reality, they weren't. But again, if someone were saying, let's go down to the Quad and kill any other ethnic group, then, or call for the genocide, was actually the specific question, for any other ethnic group, that would of course be met with a quick response. So crucial to doing this is to actually show where the violent speech, where the calls for direct violence actually take place. That was actually their defense, was there weren't calls for direct violence. In many cases, there were calls for direct violence, and there are calls for direct violence today. That means that you, as interested, more than interested observers, as interested participants, you have to do hard and distasteful work. I can tell you that in doing research for Conspiracy U, there's sometimes when I just had to get up from the computer or from the library I was in, desk I was at, because it was so distasteful to read what these professors or these conspiracy theories were. You really do, in some cases, want to puke. But you have to do that. And that means focusing on your local group, your local campus groups, Students for Justice for Palestine, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, other groups that may be around, watching and getting a sense for what those groups are by going to the campus newspaper, even subscribing to the campus newspaper if need be, getting alerts from the campus newspaper for various topics, which is usually accessible. And also, for better for worse, watching the Instagram pages and the Facebook pages of these groups, because in many cases, and Twitter, in many cases, these groups do several things. Number one, they morph from space to space, as occasionally they do have their content blocked because of the filters on the various sites, but they usually are quick to pivot to another site, including, by the way, TikTok, which I left out. So as distasteful as it may be, you have to index your local groups at the universities in question, and to follow them closely. The other thing that's critical, and this has been something that I've emphasized extensively, is to follow the faculty. Now, ironically, I mean, we have some photos of students at UCLA, for example, who are all masked, who blocked Jews from actually entering a building. And we're pretty proud of it. Well, it turns out that the one good thing about university professors is that they're pretty open about what they do. They're usually unmasked in terms of their written content, and they're unmasked in terms of their publications. So what you need to do, and I can do this at some campuses, I can't do it at others, and I don't know which campus is relevant to whoever is on the webinar. We can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A later. But it's to find out who are the most offending professors. And that, sadly, is not too hard to find. if you're following if you're following university. And again, there are whole departments that are putting out statements against Israel that are ahistorical and the like. Usually these are frequently anthropology departments, Middle East studies departments, the various studies departments from American studies, Asian studies, um, and the like. If a department ends with studies, there's a good chance that there's a fair number of anti-Semitic professors who are domiciled there, unfortunately. Certainly, who will say that they're anti-Zionist, but somehow um, only Jews who actually loudly proclaim their anti-Israelism are acceptable. And again, any other ethnic group would not be filtered to accept only acceptable members who are willing to espouse a certain party line. Again, wouldn't be true of Asians, Irish, Black, Latino, wouldn't be true of any other group, but somehow for the Jews, unless you are willing to loudly proclaim your hatred for Israel, you are excluded. And again, I do want to underscore it's actually you have to proclaim not your neutrality, but your hatred for Israel if you want to be allowed in many organizations to participate whatsoever. At UCLA to speak, even at most other organizations to just be a member. It used to be in the halcyon days of say 5-6 years ago that in order to be a officer of some of these organizations, feminists, campus feminists, like you had to hate Israel or at least proclaim your hatred of Israel. Now, really, to be a member or participant, you have to really be prepared as a Jew to proclaim your hatred to Israel. Other folks, you can be silent, but not if you're Jewish. So you need to show that is the bottom line, because that's one of the things that clearly indicates a double standard. And you need to take screenshots of this, because usually once folks are called out, they immediately change what the site says and clean up the sites. So it's very important to take screenshots to have the evidence at hand, because the other thing that people generally do, and I've witnessed this very closely at Northwestern and other places, they can say something, they can say kill the Jews, but then later deny it, and that's okay, somehow. So you need to actually have the evidence. So once you have the evidence, what do you do? And this is something that's very important. Number one, you need to organize. You need to organize a group on any campus, a committee against anti-Semitism at Tufts or at Cornell or at University of Nebraska. It doesn't matter. You need to organize. Now, the Hillels, for better or for worse, won't organize these groups. They may help you facilitate, or you may be on groups within Hillel where you can sort of call for those who are willing to join to come to a certain WhatsApp group. But you need to create these groups, and sadly, you need to check who's joining the group, because it happens not infrequently that haters of Israel try to join WhatsApp groups and other groups in order to see what's going on, and in some cases to disrupt them, in some cases to even try to give out names. I mean, for haters of Israel, there are no boundaries. I mean, we just saw that in Washington. No matter what your views are of Prime Minister Netanyahu, folks really outside of it being Israel and Jews would not try to cause probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage to a hotel merely because someone they disagree with is staying there. But If it's the Jews, somehow it's free speech. So again, you need to make sure that you have a group, and a group that's a safe space, which means doing a little work. That means whoever the administrator is going to have to check the Facebook profiles of the participants. Maybe participants have to be, have a sponsor. I'm sorry to say that that's what Jewish life in America has come to, but it's important, because it's important that there be safe spaces for Jews who oppose the demonization of Israel. So you need to organize, and that is a thing, and that will take work. And that's, again, not just saying everybody sign up. It'll take some time. And then you have to grow that group organically. You need to band together, though, because campus, university development groups are really good at um, at setting aside concerns from individuals. Very good at sympathizing. I'm so sorry that you're sorry, etc. And university boards and presidents don't take individuals seriously. They just don't. They don't really care. But when you have a group, just one second. When you have a group, it becomes a little harder. And the larger the group, the better. But again, the larger the vetted group, the better. And here, it's important to start, again, bringing these facts to whoever you think will care. So you organize, vetted group, have the facts, organize, vetted groups. Now you have to find who cares. And this is why the evidence is important, and also why you have to be able to make very clear parallels to other unacceptable behavior at universities, or to call out clearly unacceptable behavior. Now, it's very interesting that in looking at some of the sources of anti-Israel writers, and I came across this to some degree, is that very strangely, some people actually abuse sources. Now, a university may not necessarily care about someone saying kill the Jews, but they do care if someone who says kill the Jews actually miscites in a footnote, or miscites or plagiarizes. They do tend to care about that, because that's their stock and trade. And I really call out for a long time ago, sort of setting my my ear to this, or my attention to this, was actually back a couple of decades ago, when Deborah Lipstadt wrote Denying the Holocaust. And what she did was to go back and look at one of the authors who I had followed, our Professor Arthur Butts of Northwestern University, and look at his sources and look at the sources of other Holocaust deniers. And it turns out sometimes those sources were just totally misapplied. Demographic tables that were just, not really relevant to what was being said, statements that were turned around. And actually, universities care about that. I mean, it's interesting that President Claudine Gay was not forced to step down for saying that genocide to call for the genocide genocide of the Jews requires context. actually a pretty offensive, according to the Harvard guide. She was fine with that. She survived that okay. What she didn't survive were the exposure of plagiarism in her work, um, or certainly alleged plagiarism, but certainly large portions. However, you would want to characterize it, and she was forced out for that. So, as you look at the evidence, um, look for things that universities care about. And then you have to figure out who to go to. And that depends university to university. Administrations sometimes care, and sometimes are just um, basically have a PR strategy of trying to keep things quiet and just tell the Jews that everything's okay, and then let whatever happens on campus happen. Unfortunately, and I could take the entire rest of the session until the Q&A to cite where Jewish students and Jewish faculty members, by the way, are just unsafe on campus, and the administration doesn't give a hoot. But you have to figure out if there is someone who does give a hoot. And if it's not the administration, you have to start writing a letter writing campaign to the boards of trustees. And at a certain point, if boards of trustees recognize that there's liability to what is going on at the school, they do start to care. Or if they don't care, much of academia is state run, and or in some cases county run, in the cases of the community schools, community colleges. And it's important to go to elected representatives. Now, that's more effective, and this isn't a political comment, but does tend to be more effective in red states than blue states. Red states tend to give more, a lot more credence to these sorts of complaints, and blue states tend to, because there's pressure from progressives on the anti-Israel side, to and I don't mean this as a on an individual basis. There are plenty of progressives who are actually very Zionist, and but unfortunately, there are progressives who believe that to be a progressive and your part of your bona fides need to be anti-Israel. Having said that, even in blue states, it's possible to go to Democrats to raise these issues. In New York, we famously have Richie Torres, who's a progressive, who's got the progressive bona fides of anyone, but is pro-Israel. In other states, that's similarly situated. But it's not really about the congressman. It's all about the state legislators. And again, this is the work. This is the hard part. You have to go and find the state legislators who will care, who are on the committees, the relevant committees, who will care and who will raise a ruckus, because that's what the representatives don't want. That's what the trustees of the campuses don't want. They don't want to be called before the state Senate Committee on Higher Education or the Assembly Committee on Higher Education. They want to have their, quieter life and be able to do whatever they want to do. But there are legislators who are willing to call for hearings, who are willing to write letters. And so again, you need to do that hard work of finding out just who the legislators are and taking this evidence to whoever are responsible outside adults. Sometimes that's other, by the way, state supervisory bodies. That's actually happened in some states like Illinois, where there have been some state supervisory bodies when it came to the ESG arena, where the state supervisory authority was willing to say, hey, what you're doing on BDS doesn't comply with Illinois law. Um, this had to do with Morningstar, which many of you may know. I was, I was active in that endeavor, but there, this all requires focus and diligence. And finally, another venue in states not to be ignored are state attorney generals. And I just want to add one thing parenthetically when we're talking about attorney generals and law enforcement. 3,100 people were arrested on campus last, mostly in the spring. And very, very few of any were, if not any, but very, very few were prosecuted, even though in many cases, the majority of the folks arrested were not from campus. It's actually, and I'm not going to go through it. There have been articles in Tablet and other places detailing how a lot of what's been going on campus has been organized by outsiders, and even the director of the FBI has indicated that some of it is Iranian financed, and others. Some of it is clearly financed by China, in particular through one conduit in China, someone who lives in Shanghai. So pressure on DAs and others who can prosecute certainly the non-campus, the non-student participants who are A, trespassing, B, in the case of Columbia University, in some cases essentially holding, not hostage in the same way, God forbid, as what's going on in Gaza, but holding janitors, essentially not allowing them to leave the building, destroying property, defacing property. Those folks aren't being prosecuted either. And so again, the campus won't do anything. Even those students who were supposedly going to have their diplomas withheld, again, the overwhelming majority just got the diplomas once everything quieted down. So you need to have the evidence, figure out who's responsible, figure out who responsible adults are, and then go to them. Again, every one of these requires work. And if you can do it as a group, you're better off because you have more bona fides. Okay. I started out by saying, where do we go from here? I do think that in a month, we are going to have substantial further issues. And with Israel being essentially forcibly depopulated in the north by Hezbollah, at some point Israel were forced to react to allow Israelis to move back to their homes. I was on a business video call earlier today with someone who lives just outside of the evacuation zone, and he had to stop the call twice to go to leave the call twice to go to his safe room. It's not something that any sovereign country in the world would put up with. That just Hezbollah just sends missiles essentially directly to people's homes, and blows them up. It's unbelievable. And so I think we can say with pretty close to certainty, it's not over, and we're going to unfortunately have some difficult times on campus. So here's what I'm going to say to you, and it's not necessarily what you want to hear. The enemies of Israel, those who hate Jews, have been playing a long game. I talk about this, I write about this, I've researched this. It's in Conspiracy U in some detail. This is something that is not just exploded. It's been taking place over the course of decades. We're not going to win this. And we may not even turn the tide in the short run. But, we Jews have been around for 3,000 plus years. We too can play the long game. We thought we were on a holiday from history. I can tell you, I felt that way. I thought anti-Semitism was something from the past. My father, as those of you who read my works know, was a Holocaust survivor. I didn't think I'd have to be personally dealing with this in my lifetime. But the answer is we will. And we must. And the more folks who join in, the better. With unity, we can accomplish as the Jewish people a lot. When we're fighting with each other, as we've learned from the biblical civil war, the civil wars depicted in the Bible, and unfortunately the civil wars in the history of the Jews during the Second Temple period and beyond, when we're divided, we certainly fall. So we're going to have to prepare for this long game. And so the work that you do now, and that's what I'm saying, don't try to rush to put together a committee in 10 minutes. Do it in a close and vetted way. Don't try to just run with the first piece of information you have to the authorities, to the university, or else. Take your time, get it right. Spend the time looking at the curriculums of professors on the university. There's one thing that I would like to also mention is that courses are taught over fairly long periods of time. And most professors actually publicly post their curriculums, at a minimum, their reading lists. And if not, students have free access to them. So these are all things that you could start looking at now. You can start building now. I would say start building your list, start organizing your committees now. Get ready for the fall. Get ready that this is not going to be over. Get ready mentally to recognize this is something that's not going to be over this year and maybe not next year. But on the other hand, we Jews, in many cases, and in this case for sure, are the canaries in the coal mine. As my mentor, the revered Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs said, what begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And we're hearing that. If you listen closely to the protesters, it's not that they just want to destroy Israel. They actually want to destroy the United States too. They want to create something different. And they don't necessarily have the same vision of what that different place is, but it's different than what we have today. Certainly different than a liberal democracy. So this is an important battle. This is a battle where we need allies. Think about who those allies might be, whether they're in or outside of your comfort zone. Whether if you're on the right, they might be on the left. If you're on the left, they might be a little further on the right than you like to be. But think about who the allies are. Take your time. Remember also that hope is not a strategy. Wishing this away is not a strategy. It's not going to work. It's not going to, the pendulum swings type of thing. This is something that only will be resolved with your perseverance. So with that, we've hit the 7:40 mark just about. And I'm open to taking some questions and answers. I'm open to taking some questions. I don't know if there are any there yet. I haven't been looking, but I'm going to pass the baton to, or as I guess it's fun it's appropriate to say, I'm passing the torch to Audrey for a moment.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Scott. I just want to say parenthetically that Scott embodies everything that he's been speaking about as a lay leader. He's not a Jewish professional. He's a lay leader activist, and he has really outlined for all of us the work that needs to be done. And even as he's not feeling well, as you can see, he's committed to giving this lecture and giving us guidance about how to confront this awesome and important work. So thank you, Scott. Thank you for doing this even as you're sniffling and coughing away. So there's a number of questions. I'd like to take the first question, a global question. Why does the college campus matter? Kids protested, we protested the Vietnam War, we grew up, we got more nuanced. Maybe it's just that. Why is it important that we focus on the college campus?
Okay, so great question. This used to be when the book came out in the long ago times of 2021 and 2022. This used to be a very common question. The answer is what happens, it's not Vegas anymore on campus. What happens on campus spreads everywhere. People no longer, in the old days, people protested, but they understood the difference. They understood different sides of the argument. I mean, I went to university, I guess not quite when dinosaurs roamed Deering Meadow, but I had friends who were definitely communists, Leninists, some Maoists. But you know what? We could sit down and talk to each other, and and then have a beer, or do whatever. Today, that actually doesn't happen, because what's happened dangerously on campus is the university has actually changed its mission. The university used to have its mission as being intellectual truth and pursuit. You may totally disagree with people, but the mission is pursuit of truth, pursuit of academic studies. Now, and you could have in the halcyon days, communist and capitalist debate. Now it's different. Now there's much more ideological purity that's required on campus. It would have never been thought before that you couldn't become a graduate student in many disciplines if you had a certain belief. You could score 800 on your grad board exam, but if you don't hate Israel, it doesn't matter. You can't get a degree from our university in American studies. And then when you graduate, because you haven't actually learned to think things through, you've been told to write a assignment as to why Israel is bad. When you get out there and you're a K through 12 educator, it's okay to accept a curriculum that somehow excises Jewish history from reality, and we've all parachuted into history, post-Holocaust, where we, as Jews, somehow took over Israel from being living in Europe for 3,000 years. You can actually learn now in universities. I'm making, obviously what I'm saying just now is hyperbole, but you now actually in many courses learn a false history. And I've looked at college curriculums where people are actually taught hoaxes, and then they leave believing those hoaxes. I have personally talked to groups of people in their 20s who not one of them likes Israel, but they don't even know anybody who thinks Israel is okay. So what's happening, what's different today is what happens on campus is no longer we're going to learn together, we're going to protest together, we're going to do this together, we're going to do that together, but we're going to think for ourselves. We all have to accept the same social mission. And that's not intellectual pursuits.
Amazingly, we have people calling in from Australia and from the Netherlands. And professors that are saying that they themselves are at a quandary of what to do in their universities. What can professors do to safeguard themselves and also to voice, because a lot of them are saying they're afraid of losing their jobs and being ostracized in their departments.
Yeah, well, I've talked to professors who are, I'm gonna come to an answer because there are things that can be done. But I've talked to professors who have done a great deal of research in certain areas, um, thought they were shoo-in for tenure, and found that they were denied tenure, and then someone else came in without, barely a clue from another department in another university who's hadn't written very much, but had anti-Israel bona fides. And it's really heartbreaking. It's worse than bad. It's heartbreaking. Um, the Jewish exclusion that's going on campus, and it doesn't bode well. But again, here I want to go to the positive, because I think what university professors can do is they can band together. I do think it's important. There's something called the Academic Engagement Network, led by Miriam Ellman here in the United States. There's the Zionist Professors Association, run by another professor whose name escapes me, I believe from North Carolina. And I think banding together is critical, because clearly there are departments where if you're the lone, and I'm thinking of, professors who both Audrey and I know, you could be the lone pro-Israel professor in your department, and nobody will even have lunch with you. So it's important to get that chizuk, that support from like-minded professors. It's also, and I hate to say this, like what I was saying before, it's important to document, because I also have talked to professors, and this means, frankly, printing out emails. I'm going to be very specific here, because I've talked to professors who have had blatantly anti-Semitic actions taken against them, where they've lost positions or the like, where they have been subject to harassment. But if once they're fired, all of their university emails are extinguished. And the only way to get those back, and somehow they get deleted by the university, and in some sort of cleanup, or never can be found again. It's important to keep a track record. It's very important, and it pains me to say this, but you have to assume the worst from the university on this stuff. And if you're willing to ultimately go to outside of the university, outside of academia, the number of folks I know lost tenure didn't want to leave academia. They loved research. But if you're willing to go to the think tank in other areas, or just to industry, you should go public with what's happening. Now, in terms of the faculty, I think we need to start now by calling this out to, again, what I said was the responsible adults, and actually putting in place standards. There are folks who are talking about putting in place standards of having enough conservatives. Most of academia is pretty monolithic. If you don't have the appropriate thoughts, you can't teach. And the only way, in all candor, is to go around the faculty, because search committees are made up of faculty. Search committees for administration are made up of faculty and administration. And the true controllers of the university are really the faculty. It's going to be the long game, but we have to start again. And I think, and I wrote an article about this a few years ago, an essay about this a few years ago, I think we have to focus, for better, for worse, on some red state universities where call it kavod. They should hire communists, but they should hire some capitalists too. And places where diversity of thought can actually be enforced through the legislature. I don't want to over control it. There shouldn't be just universities which have a monolithic thought on the right. But right now, that's not the problem.
So on that note, can you comment, Maya Bloom asks, can you comment on groups like JVP that have been used as examples that this isn't anti-Semitism, but anti-Zionism? In particular, the groups that misspelled the Passover Seder plate at the Columbia encampment. Are they even Jewish, or is this some kind of op?
So one of the things that's a modern, a very recent phenomenon is the as a Jew movement. I oppose Israel as a Jew. The first thing that comes out of their mouth, and it's very interesting, this came out of President Schill's, at Northwestern University. Before they use the word I or we, it's as a Jew. And I actually did have this conversation once with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, because I was truthfully befuddled by the same issue when it was less. This is going back to, I don't know, 2018, 17 that I talked to him about this. It wasn't quite the same, but there were those who were also, they weren't saying as a Jew, but they were saying something similar. And this is, in a way, one of the hardest things. I mean, we just a few weeks ago read Parshat Korah. We read Korah, and and the question is, who was inside the tent and who was outside the tent. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to spend some more time drawing the boundaries of the tent and saying that, not every Jew speaks for all the Jews. Who is actually speaking for the mainstream Jewry? JVP isn't. I mean, going back to when I researched Conspiracy U, I found that most JVP members who I studied had additional identities. Some, and I think there is, and I think we have to acknowledge this, some Jews are anti-Israel. That's always been the case. When I say always been the case, it's been the case since the rise of the Zionist movement. But it is not going to leave us. What's happening different now is that there's a coercion. And this is where I think we need to work. I've talked to students who really aren't anti-Israel, but if they want to hang with the cool kids, if they want to join the feminists organization, if they want to join any other progressive organization, they have to declare their hatred for Israel. And I think this becomes something where we have to work almost one by one. I recounted in Conspiracy U one woman who wasn't Jewish who wanted to co-sign a letter with me, but was told by her Latino friends that if she signed that letter, she would be forever ostracized and her friends wouldn't speak to her anymore. We have to certainly allow and welcome people who are in JVP or in other groups because they feel that that's their only social solution. So I think solving this problem is going to be a one-by-one solution, but I think we have to be strong on one point. Anybody can say as a Jew, but that doesn't mean they speak for the Jews. And if you want to speak for yourself, that's fine. One of the things I point out too is that there are also Jews who are Holocaust deniers. There's a whole bunch of them. And that doesn't mean that they speak for all the Jewish people, and that doesn't mean they're right. No easy
Um,
answer though to that one. I want to.
no, I just want to mention that Marcy Goldstein mentioned another organization called the Jewish Studies Zionist Network, run
That's
by
the one. That's the
Patty,
one.
UNC Wilmington.
Yeah, that was North Carolina that I was blanking on.
Right. Okay. Okay, there's one other many questions, Scott, many questions, but one that takes a broader view and says, isn't it time to play offense rather than defense, which basically ends up being a whack-a-mole game. Israel's fight is only the tip of a larger fight. Don't you agree with that?
I definitely agree. I think, look, and I started talking about this at the end. We need to explain to our allies that, look, if Israel, at the end of parliamentary sessions in Iran, they say death to America, death to Israel, death to America. The little Satan is Israel. The big Satan is the United States of America. People really, and it's like what happened, unfortunately, in Germany and elsewhere. When they're done coming for the Jews, they're coming for the rest of society. And by the way, when the JVP people, God forbid, heaven forbid, the JVP people are no longer useful, they're coming for those Jews too. That's just the reality. It's just the reality. So I do think we can go on offense. There's so many, and by the way, the anti-Israel forces are so focused on this possibility that they're petrified. I mean, Bassam Eid, who is a Palestinian human rights advocate, who just follows what's going on in the territories, primarily on the West Bank, he is, for him to talk is a major effort because they try to shut him down. I mean, what happens in Palestinian society in many cases would be totally unacceptable. Look, as many people have said, there are many groups that say they're for the Gazans, but they would be immediately extinguished if they ever set foot in Gaza. And that needs to be explained.
Hey, Scott, we have just a minute left. Is there anything else that you haven't said that you would like to leave us with tonight?
So this is our test. This is this generation's test. Are we going to just let this pass? Are we going to try to, hope for the best? Hope is not a strategy. And so I encourage everyone on this call to take action. And whatever that action is, it could be 5 minutes of action a day. But take action, get organized, start organizing. And remember, don't despair. This is the long game.
Right. Thank you so much, Scott, for this incredibly inspirational, insightful presentation tonight. Our next Scholars Circle features Dr. Olga Kirschbaum-Shirazgi on legal dimensions navigating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the global stage. This lecture will take place on Wednesday, July 31st at 12 p.m. It's a daytime lecture. Again, that's Wednesday, July 31st at 12 p.m. Thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you again, Scott, and we'll see you shortly. Good night.